Welcome, everybody, to Bread Theory. Tonight we're going to be covering What is Communist Anarchism, Chapter 13. We're doing Part 2. Only got halfway through last time, had a lot of discussion going, so we didn't make it quite all the way through. It's also a very long chapter. It's 40 minutes on the audiobook, so it's a longer chapter compared to some of the others. But we will get to the end of that tonight and perhaps delve into Chapter 14. We'll have to see how things go. As always, wherever you're seeing this, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, donate, whatever the buttons do, and the interface that you're looking at. Go ahead and do all that stuff. Helps me out, helps me reach more of an audience, helps get this video noticed by the various algorithms that control so much of our social interactions, for better or worse. So, anyway, we were talking last time about socialism and Alexander Berkman's thoughts on socialism. And when he says socialism, he basically is talking about social democracy or social democrats, that sort of theory. The groups that thought that we could bring about socialism through just incremental reform, through electing the right people into the positions of power, to then take things over. So far, that strategy has not worked out. It is basically stalled out. In probably the best case scenarios, you could look at the Nordic model, where there are robust union memberships, a lot of protections for workers just in general, a lot of social safety nets put in place so that if you lose your job, you're not facing homelessness, food shortage, anything like that. You can get back on your feet. A lot of these places have, free or severely reduced in price education. A lot of great things, although at the same time that does come at the expense often of the third world. They depend very heavily on third world products, and third world cheap labor for their factories, and also on fossil fuels, especially in the case of like Norway. So it's kind of a mixed bag. It'd definitely be great if the U.S. moved more towards that. It's hard to argue otherwise that would not be a better society if we had things like universal health care that the rest of the, you know, so-called first world has. Uh, Things like tertiary education, college and beyond, that didn't put you in debt for the rest of your life, as a lot of other nations have. Lots of great things that would be, material gains for a lot of people. But I don't think it's ever going to get us across the finish line, to doing away with capitalism, to doing away with what I consider, as well as Alexander Berkman certainly, to be a inherently exploitative system where you have owners that can make money just by owning, and owners that get to make all sorts of decisions about people's daily lives pretty much unilaterally or with very little oversight. Perhaps there's a board at the company that uh, you know ties their hands somewhat, but mostly it's going to be for the purpose of legal shielding. So you can't go so far that you're going to get the company in legal trouble, and also for profit. So none of the considerations by the board are usually going to be the well-being of the worker in any real sense. Just the minimum to keep them out of legal hazard. But anyway, yeah. So Bergman does not have a very high opinion of what he calls socialism. He thinks it's just never going to get us there, and it's going to stall out. And largely he was right by that. When we look at socialism as I said, as social democracy, as incremental change from within, and getting to socialism without any sort of real revolution. So yeah, and as always, this is an educational space. There are no dumb questions except the ones that are designed just to waste time. So as long as you're coming in good faith, any questions you might have are always welcome. Um, that's a big reason of why I do what I do, is just to help bring this material to as many people as possible, but also bring it in a way that hopefully can be understood in a modern context. Because even this book, almost 100 years old now, so times have changed, material conditions have changed. It's not all going to map on perfectly with our current situation. All right, that's enough foregrounding of everything. I think we can move into the book itself now. Let's pull it up here. Okay, so I still have the closed captioning turned on, and let's get going into the chapter. You know what? I'm going to back it up just a few seconds just so we can remind ourselves of where we left off from last time. It'll help maybe jog our memories. So we'll go back about 20 seconds here.
Into their political career with its emoluments and advantages.
I'll go
The
back just a little
hopelessness
bit
of
more.
politics to aid the cause of labor. Such a confession would mean an end to their political career with its emoluments and advantages. So the great majority of them are content to keep their own counsel and let well enough alone.
Okay, so what he was trying to explain at that point, just to refresh you, is a pretty good picture of how it happens. You have young, maybe idealistic people going into politics, but once they get into the political machine, they find that they are just structurally incapable of making the sort of change they want. And then on the other side, pushing them towards changing their ideals entirely is forces of corruption. The idea that you have a lot of privileged information as a member of Congress or a member of Parliament. And we're definitely seeing that today when you have the likes of Nancy Pelosi fighting against Congress people being able to trade individual stocks and their family as well, because it's either her husband is a super genius when it comes to stock trading, or she gives him tons of insider information, which is supposed to be illegal, but it's very hard to track because he time and time again beats the market average. In fact, there were groups set up to monitor his trades so that they could know which stocks to trade on. They're getting basically secondhand insider information in that way. And they found that to be a good strategy to do well in the stock market. But of course, Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to give up that control, just as the sort of thing that he's talking about. She likes being able to use her position to keep herself really comfortable and keep herself in power. And I'm sure these politicians come up with all sorts of justifications. I know Mitch McConnell talks a lot about how you basically got to do whatever you got to do in order to keep a seat at the table. Because if you don't have a seat at the table, then it doesn't matter what principles you're standing on. You're not going to get it. You're not going to get anything done at all. So that's his justification for taking tons and tons of money from the various, big corporate interests of his state to finance his campaign, because you got to do it. It's the cost of doing business and stuff like that. As though that's a good thing. As though that points to us having a good system where people can't take stands on principle because they're afraid of risking their political career and their political future. That doesn't speak to me of a country that is serious about progress in any sense of the word. So yeah, so I think Berkman is pretty spot on that the strategy of infiltrating the government and changing it, especially at higher levels, is a loser strategy, because it changes you, and the system is not designed to accommodate the sort of change that you would like to make. So you're pressed on both sides.
Power and position have gradually stifled their conscience and they have not the strength and honesty to swim against the current. That is what has become of socialism, which had once been the hope of the oppressed of the world. The socialist parties have joined hands with the bourgeoisie and the enemies of labor. They have become the strongest bulwark of capitalism, pretending to the masses that they are fighting for their interests, while in reality they have made common cause with the exploiters. They have so far forgotten and gone back on their original socialism that in the Great World War, the socialist parties in every country in Europe helped their governments to lead the workers to slaughter. The war has clearly demonstrated the bankruptcy of socialism. The socialist parties, whose motto was "Workers of the world unite," sent toilers to murder each other. From having been bitter enemies of militarism and war, they became defenders of their land, urging workers to don soldiers' uniform and kill their fellow workers in other countries. Strange indeed.
Very good point.
For years they have been telling the proletariat...
That's a very good point. It is always the working class that fights in the trenches, fights on the front lines in wars. They never send the officers or the privileged classes of the military to actually put themselves in harm's way. So that means that when two armies are meeting on the field of battle, it's going to be the poorest of each country slaughtering each other, by and large. Those are the people that die most in war, aside from innocent civilians, which tend to be some of the largest casualties of war. So you got to wonder about the ethical nature of being a working class person and allowing yourself to be sent overseas to just kill other working class people, especially if you got into that position because you were more or less coerced by your economic conditions in the first place. You live in a small town, or in a town that for whatever reason doesn't have a lot of job prospects. You might find that the army, or the armed forces, I should say, is your best bet for getting out of that town. And then you're only being sent to kill other people who are in your same desperate situation, by and large. You have to at least question the ethics of that.
That they had no country, and that their interests are opposed to those of their masters, and that labor has nothing to lose but their chains. But at the first sign of war, they called upon the toilers to join the army, and voted support and money for the government to do the work of carnage. This happened in every country in Europe. True, there were socialist minorities that protested against the war, but the dominant majority in the socialist parties condemned and ignored them, and lined up for the slaughter. It was a most terrible betrayal, not only of socialism, but of the whole working class, of humanity itself. Socialism, whose purpose it was to educate the...
Thanks for the follow. Kay, how do you say? Kay, how do you say? Oh, that's a nice name. We're talking about, we're looking at a pretty introductory text on what it means to be an anarchist. This is Alexander Berkman. His What is Communist Anarchism, also known as the ABC of Anarchy. It's gone by many titles. For some reason, it was published under several different titles in its day. And he's talking right now about the failures of reform socialism, the idea that we can take over the government and make it socialist that way.
The world on the evils of capitalism, to the murderous character of patriotism, to the brutality and uselessness of war. Socialism, which was the champion of man's rights, of liberty and justice, of hope and promise of a better day, miserably turned into a defender of the government and the masters, became the handmaiden of the militarists and jingo nationalists. The former social democrats became social patriots. This did not happen because of mere treachery, however. To take that view would be to miss the main point and misunderstand its warning lesson. Treachery it was indeed, both in its nature and effect, and the results of that treachery of bankrupted socialism disillusioned millions that believed in it and filled the world with black reaction. But it was not only treachery, not treachery of the ordinary kind. The real cause is much deeper. We are what we eat, a great thinker said. That is, the life we lead, the environment we live in, the thoughts we think, and the deeds we do all subtly fashion our character and make us what we are. The socialists' long political activity and cooperation with the bourgeois parties gradually turned their thoughts and mental habits from socialist ways of thinking. Little by little, they forgot that the purpose of socialism was to educate the masses, to make them see through the game of capitalism, to teach them that the government is their enemy, that the church keeps them in ignorance, that they are duped by ideas to perpetuate the superstition and wrongs which present-day society has built. In short, they forgot that socialism was to be the Messiah who would drive the darkness out of the minds and bodies of men, lift them from the slough of ignorance and materialism, and rouse their natural idealism, the striving for justice and brotherhood, toward liberty and light. They forgot it. They had to forget in order to be practical, to accomplish something, to become successful politicians. You cannot dive into a swamp and remain clean. They had to forget it, because their object had become to get results, to win elections, to secure power. They knew they could not have success in politics by telling the people the whole truth about their conditions. For the truth not only antagonizes the government, the church, and the school, it often prejudices the masses. These it is necessary to educate, and that is a slow and difficult process. But the political game demands success, quick results. The socialists had to be careful not to come into great conflict with the powers that be. They could not afford to lose time in educating the people. It therefore became their main objective to win votes. To achieve that, they had to trim their sails. They had to lop off, little by little, those parts of socialism which might result in persecution by the authorities and disfavor from the church, or which would keep bigoted elements from joining their ranks.
So this should sound like a pretty familiar rationalization for why more progress doesn't happen, because you always have to make compromises in order to get it. You have to compromise with your own party, the most extreme opposite end of your own party. You have to compromise with the opposing party. And so it's one way that the system itself prevents any fundamental change to its structure, is because it allows parties from all different sides. So you have the in America, it comes down to the Democrats, who are still capitalist, but have a progressive wing, and then the Republicans, who are very reactionary. So if you're having to compromise constantly with reactionaries, you're the median, or I guess it would be the average of where things stand politically, is always going to be to the right. It's always going to be way far away from reforming the entire system into something that gets beyond capitalism, that moves leftward past capitalism. So it's a pretty obvious structural way that their goal of implementing socialism in this way can't possibly be. There are structural barriers to it that are kind of built into the system. Uh, so Nathan says, so what we need is a uniformed assault in like every continent. That was the I guess the thought of a lot of the more internationally focused communists that yeah, you know, and I believe they're pretty right about this, is that until at least the majority of countries around the world are socialist, um, no country can really be communist, because you're still having to deal with the rest of the world when it comes to things like trade and diplomacy and stuff like that. So when it comes to trade, you're going to have to participate in a largely capitalist global marketplace. So that's one likely reason that China is not as socialist as it probably even presents itself to be, because it still has to reckon with the rest of the world. It still depends on selling its products around the world to capitalist nations. And so it's little wonder that they then, erode from their original ideals to a more state capitalist sort of an arrangement, which from everything that I've been able to tell, that seems to be the predominant form in China. It's more a state capitalist system, which is still in a lot of ways better than private capitalism, right? Because you see radical redistributions of wealth at the very least. When billionaires get too carried away with hoarding money and assets, the government just steps in and takes it from them and redistributes it. Um, you saw an incredible show of how robust their healthcare system is when, even though the recent virus originated in China, they've had one of the lowest death rates per capita in the entire world. I think they've only had like 5,500 deaths total, which is just incredible considering they're a nation of over 1 billion. And meanwhile, in the US, a nation like a third their size, we've had almost 1 million deaths. It just, if nothing else, it shows the superiority of their system, whatever you want to call it. It seems like they're doing at least that part right. um, so Nathan also says, exactly, short of slowly changing the minds and hearts of the system over 300 years, which climate change is dictating, we don't have that time for. Yeah, we are in quite the double bind right now, because from everything that I can tell, it does seem like we're headed towards another tipping point, similar to the circumstances that we had in the Great Depression that pushed for the New Deal. We have drastic and ever widening wealth inequality. We have a whole chunk of the population, a large chunk of the population, that is not making enough money really to even survive, that is constantly going more and more into debt. And people don't, the myths that more than anything really keep the system together. The idea that you can make it if you just keep your nose to the grindstone. You'll always social mobility is possible. It seems like entire generations are not really believing that anymore to a great extent, because they're not finding that to be true. The millennials, I believe, are the first generation to, on average, be making less than our parents did, the generation before, at their same time in their life. We have debt that we can never get rid of in the form of college debt that follows us around our entire life. We can't discharge it through bankruptcy. Depending on who co-signed on it, even our own deaths may not prevent that debt from being collected. It might just shift to another person. Things don't seem to be getting better, is the point. For the majority of millennials, also Gen X to a great extent, though they seem to get talked about the least of any generation. But then also the Zoomers, even more so. Um, so the system seems to be breaking down, and unless there's a big correction, a whole lot of concessions from the liberal side of our politicians, I don't see how they can hold it together all that much longer. Um, and yeah, with the extra pressure that other generations have not had to deal with, that climate change is here and is causing damage year after year after year, displacing people year after year, and it will only get worse. It's the perfect storm for something drastic to happen. And if huge concessions aren't met, then we're either going to descend into fascism. Some strong man will emerge and say, don't listen to them, follow me. That person will just do a lot of the same things that Trump did and just ignore the law as much as they can get away with it. But as things continue to break down, that ability to get away with it is going to increase. And so there's the threat that we descend into fascism. So that's a second option that might happen. And a third option would be some sort of socialist revolution. People might just be so fed up with the system and see no hope of ever having a better life. Enough of those people might exist that it pushes for some sort of revolution. However that plays out. But it seems like we're winding up for a big shift, whatever that be. So potentially optimistic times, potentially really scary and violent times ahead. It's really hard to say. But it's pretty clear that the current system doesn't have any answers for us. The Democrats promise a whole bunch and then don't really even deliver much. I was just watching some more news, and he was going through all the accomplishments of the Biden administration, and the bulk of the change that Biden has made has just been to undo the stuff that Trump put in place. That's like his big accomplishment so far. And other than that, things are more or less status quo. There's a little bit of fiddling around the edges, a little bit more money directed towards helping some trans people get gender confirmation surgery. But that's about it, and that's not going to be enough for the real systemic change that we need. And Nathan also says, debt is how they control us, and when the debt no longer controls us, that's when the military and the police. That's what the military and the police were. Absolutely true. That is how the system is set up. Yeah, that's one reason that colleges were allowed to adopt a more for-profit model to jack up tuition year after year, was to control the so-called radicals in the world, because people got really spooked during like the Vietnam era. They thought with pretty good reason that things could have tipped and gone, led to a communist revolution, and that definitely was a possibility at that time. So they became pretty scared of students and their organizational skills. And so they wanted a way to control them. And what better way than to keep them in debt peonage their entire life? And those that got good enough jobs to get out of that will, of course, be more likely to back the current system. And those that don't, their power's been greatly reduced. And also, thanks, Joe Biden. Because of him, also, we are not allowed to discharge student loan debts through bankruptcy. So, but yes, the police and the military are primarily tools of capitalism. Police are there to protect capital and capitalists first and foremost. You will always see this during civil unrest. They will allow poor neighborhoods to burn. They will channel people towards those poor neighborhoods to do destruction there. And they will actively protect rich neighborhoods and rich people's businesses. Um, so yeah, when uh, when stuff goes down, it's clear what side the police are on. And the same thing is true of the military. Military is primarily used to uh, advance corporate interests around the world. Um, that's mainly what we do with our military. Sometimes we'll put a pretext around the world, the wars that we fight. We'll say that we're fighting for liberating so and so, but it's kind of funny that uh, none of the places that we've invaded seem to have any lasting liberation. It's almost like that never was really a priority. Um, yeah. So I mean that's the system we have. It protects capital and capitalists. That's what it's there for. All right, let's move on in the chapter here.
They had to compromise. They did. First of all, they stopped talking revolution. They knew that capitalism cannot be abolished without a bitter struggle, but they decided to tell the people that they could bring about socialism by legislation, by law, and that is all that is necessary to put socialists in government. They ceased denouncing government as an evil. They quit enlightening the workers about its real character as an agency for enslavement.
And just to insert my own opinion there, saying he was talking about how they ceased to point to government as an evil. I would agree with the communists. I don't believe that government is by necessity an evil. And after reading David Graeber's latest book, the Dawn of Everything, it seems that there have been plenty of governments um, throughout time around the world that have worked much more towards egalitarianism, towards people being more or less on equal standing. Um, so to say that any one system has inevitable consequences to it, that just because we believe in a government of one kind or another, that it's by necessity going to work towards capital and capitalist interests, or monarchy and monarchist interests, or slavery and slavers' interests. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think a worker state is possible. It just doesn't happen to be the strategy that I prefer to get to socialism. I would much prefer a dual power structure, a prefigurative use of what power we can be afforded under this current system as it dies, to set up, and there's really no other word for it, but a local government apparatus that is horizontally structured, that is much more enfranchising to average people, but nonetheless functions as, you know, as a government, just not an official one, to provide people with the basics of life. and to give people a democratic say in their daily life. That's my preferred strategy. That doesn't mean that's going to be the best strategy in all cases, or that every government that is being struggled against is going to have the same weaknesses. So yeah, definitely, it's definitely possible that other 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 strategies would work better in other circumstances. I'll just put it that way. So anyway, in short, I disagree that government inherently is dominating and unfair and unfreeing and enslaving and so forth.
Instead, they began asserting that they, the socialists, are the staunchest upholders of the state and its best defenders, that far from being opposed to law and order, they are its truest friends, that they are indeed the only ones who sincerely believe in government, except that the government must be socialistic, that is, that they, the socialists, are to make the laws and run the government. Thus, instead of weakening the false and enslaving belief in law and government, to weaken it so that those institutions could be abolished as a means of oppression, the socialists actually worked to strengthen the people's faith in forcible authority in government, so that today, the members of the socialist parties the world over are the strongest believers in the state and are therefore called statists. Yet their greatest teachers, Marx and Engels, clearly taught that the state only serves to suppress, and that when people will achieve real liberty, the state will be abolished, will disappear. Socialist compromise for political success.
I'm going to take a little break here. I need to go use the bathroom, but I'll be right back. I'll go ahead and put the music back on while I'm gone. But I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. Had to take a little break there, but we are back. So let's continue on with the chapter.
Did not stop there. It went further. To gain votes, the socialist parties decided not to educate the people about the false hypocrisy and menace of organized religion. We know what a bulwark of capitalism and slavery the church as an institution is and always has been.
Yeah, Berkman does not think too highly of the church. Plenty of good reason for that thought. Various religions have intertwined themselves very much with government throughout history. And when that happens, it usually is not for the best. It's usually to impose a certain worldview on everyone, regardless of what they believe, and to try and control people's lives more. It has not been a good thing. And often it is used to justify state power as well. But it's not all churches. It's not all religions. It's not all branches of any particular religion. There's always groups that are more progressive, that found themselves on, or that establish themselves on more progressive values. You know, the more progressive readings of a sacred text, or the more progressive parts of a sacred text. That really, more than anything, seems to be the determining factor on how a particular sect of a religion interacts with the public. So for him to say that it's always been this way, and it's always this one way that it exerts its influence, I think that's an overreach. That's an overreach. I like to bring up the examples of the Quakers, a sect of Christianity in America. I think they might be only in America. In fact, I don't know that much about that particular sect, but very progressive in their values, don't have heads of their church, allow anyone to stand up and sermonize or preach to a congregation if the Spirit so moves them, including women, which they've gotten lots of flack from other churches for being the earliest adopters of allowing women to be spiritual leaders. But then beyond that, and most importantly, were instrumental in setting up and running the Underground Railroad, one of the biggest oppositional forces to slavery. So, while it's true that many sects of Christianity supported slavery, used the Bible to justify slavery, and made apologia for why white people were supposedly the inheritors of the world, and everyone else was lesser than. Even though that's true, it's not all groups of Christianity. It's not all branches of Christianity. And there's many others that follow traditions of liberation theology, of anarcho-Christianity. The list goes on and on. So I see where he's coming from when he says that the church has always been a regressive institution, basically, or an oppressive institution. But I don't think it's entirely fair to characterize it that way. And I say this as someone who does not go to church, does not follow any religion. So
It is obvious to people who believe in the church, swear by the priest, and bow to his authority, will naturally be obedient to him and his commands. Such people, steeped in ignorance and superstition, are the easiest victims of the masters.
And I don't like that either. The idea that people are just victims of religion, that they're poor dupes of history, basically, to follow any religion, even when it goes against their material interests. At its best, that's incredibly condescending and not really a great way to get your message across if you want any sort of mass movement. And at its worst, it's just very dismissive and reductionist of a multitude of reasons why a person might choose to believe in one religion or another. So I don't like that strategy. I don't like that orientation either.
But in order to achieve success in their electoral campaigns, the socialists decided to eliminate educational anti religious propaganda so as not to offend popular prejudices. They declared religion a private matter and excluded all criticism of the church from.
I think that's fair. And to be honest, if you want a mass movement, you can't be it's not a good strategy to alienate the core beliefs of the majority of people, right? Religious affiliation is still far and away the majority position in this country. Let's look at religion and let's look at religious affiliation in the United States. All right, I'm gonna switch quickly to share that screen. So we'll take a look together. There's the Pew Research Center, generally considered to be um, pretty accurate in the way that they do their methods. Okay, religious groups by tradition. Christian, 70%, right there. People that self-identify as Christian. The biggest one being evangelical Protestant. Second biggest being Catholic, and then you have mainline Protestant, historically black Protestant, and then a smattering of this and that in terms of Christianity. And then we look at non-Christian faith, it's 5.9%, and that includes Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hindu, and other. So we get all the way down to unaffiliated religious nuns, so having no religion. 22%. 22% of people. And then of that, only 3.1% are say, I believe in no God. That is atheism. 4% agnostic, which is I don't know whether or not, but do not follow a religion. The biggest one is just like nothing in particular. Don't I don't really have any particular religion. So maybe they were raised in a faith, but don't have anything. But at best, if we're going to be really really harsh to the church, or all religions, or even just Christianity, you are running the risk of alienating 70% of the country. 70%. Are you just going to try really hard for that 1 in 5 that doesn't have a particular religion? Because that doesn't seem like a winning strategy to me. So I would agree with those reform socialist position that it's not advantageous to do things to try and eschew religious people or religions, or do things that are designed to offend them in any way. We got a lot of people we need for our coalition to actually be successful, right? So just from a practical matter, That seems like a dumb thing to do. That seems really stupid. Oh, you can look by state. That's kind of cool. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that up for a second. Um, yeah, I'm finding that I really don't agree a lot with Berkman's prescriptions for what to do about anything when it comes to pushing for anarchism or socialism or whatever. I, uh, I feel like he's very individual in his anarchist stance, and for me, from the get go, that seems not very attractive. I am much more tend towards the collectivist side. The idea that when we do things together, that's when we have power. When we try and just do things on our own, or conceive of things on our own, never compromise with anyone else. It's all about what I believe and what I how I want to project myself into the world. I don't feel that is a powerful strategy at all. I think we need to work together. And I think the best way to do that is to start organizing everybody around us. Go neighborhood by neighborhood, whatever neighborhood you're in. If you happen to be in a city of any large size, where there's a lot of working class people, just start in your own neighborhood. Organize a neighborhood council, which means interacting with a lot of people that are not going to share your views at all. But the idea is to start working together where you can. It's the idea that even if you don't share the same views right now, by setting up networks of mutual aid, by trying to enact the system that you want to see, have the world be how you envision it being, that a lot of people will come over to your side just naturally. They'll see things in action. It's the old cliche that action speaks louder than words, but I think it's really true. Like you can debate, you can argue, you can push people to believe what you want to believe, what you want them to believe, you know, all the time, and end up making no progress that way, or little meaningful progress. But if you just start doing it and people start seeing what you're talking about, I think that's a much more powerful way to get them on your side. Um, and then things like what religious beliefs they have are not going to matter. Because if everyone is getting their basic needs met, if everyone is feeling like they have meaningful say in even this parallel government that you're setting up, uh, they're gonna be with you, right? They're not going to try and destroy everything at that point because they will be benefiting in a very material and apparent way from the system that you believed in from the start, that they may have even had their doubts about. Um, so yeah, but doing things that way is going to run you into a lot of people that don't share any of your beliefs right now, and that's okay. That's okay, because all it takes is enough people to at least try those ideas, try to enact them, try to set up a mutual aid network of education, or of, helping people fix up their own cars, so that they can keep going to work, or a mutual aid network that feeds people in the park once a week or something like that. As long as you can keep at it, and as long as you make sure that you're never so dependent on large institutions to prop you up that if they were to ever withdraw their support, you'd be ruined. As long as you don't fall into that trap, uh, you can just keep on building things, and yeah, you will get these people on your side. You don't have to beat them over the head about any of their beliefs right now. If we start with the premise that everyone is more or less the same, and therefore everyone deserves an equal footing to start out on, everyone deserves the basics of life to be able to make decisions in their own life, to have agency, democracy, choice, uh, then that also means for people that right now disagree with you, that means freedom and agency for those people too. Um, so yeah, so maybe don't worry so much about what people believe at all, really, at this point. Maybe it's better to just worry about pushing forward with whatever systems we can set up on our own. You know? All right. Enough of that. We'll just continue on.
From their agitation. What you personally believe is indeed a private affair, but when you get together with other people and organize them into a body to impose your belief upon others, to force them to think as you do, and to punish them, to the extent of your power, if they entertain other beliefs, then it is no more your private matter. You might as well say that the Inquisition, which tortured and burned people alive as heretics, was a private affair. It was.
So now we've crossed a threshold now from people just believing something to people enacting violence based on that belief. And that's a pretty clear line that we can all recognize. Um, so yeah, we're not going to allow people to organize for hatred in our neighborhoods. We don't have to tolerate that sort of thing. We don't have to tolerate people trying to amass power to be able to wield over others. But we should also recognize too that if we're pushing towards the system that we want, it's going to mean just by necessity that some people end up having less power than they do now. If we do away with just capitalism, just getting to that point, getting to socialism, to the point where there's no longer a worker-owner relationship, where at the very least all owners are also workers, and all workers are also owners. Even getting to that point does diminish a kind of freedom, and that's the freedom to profit off of other people's labor just by being an owner. It's, I don't think, a worthy freedom. I don't think it's a justifiable freedom to uphold, which is why I think it's okay to do away with that, but it still does do away with a kind of freedom. But we already do that now, and no one has any problem with it. We don't allow things like indentured servitude. We don't allow slavery. Having the freedom to enslave someone is a kind of freedom, and that has been a way that people have justified that sort of institution in the past. But again, everyone today understands that those are not freedoms that are worth upholding. So we don't allow, we take away the freedom from people to enslave one another. We take away the freedom for people to set up indentured servitude contracts, with the idea that overall it is for the greater good of everybody. So I think we can do that one step further and take away the freedom of people to exploit others just because they own something, to exploit workers because they are the owner, to act like a dictatorship within the private confines of a business. Oh, that was a bug that just went across. We somehow still have all these box elder bugs in our house. I don't know how they have survived this long, but we got dozens of them. We have a big, all of our windows face south, and so in the autumn they all just come and congregate and wiggle their way into our house. And I guess just because we have so many houseplants, they somehow or another survive the winter. But yeah, there's one. He's he's probably gonna cross the camera once again. Um, anyway, it is important to realize that by imposing any system, uh, we are taking away some types of freedom. It's just that we're doing so for a greater amount of freedom on the whole, a greater average amount of freedom for people on the whole. And I think that's a fair and okay and justifiable trade-off. Um, so I think Berkman would have done well to recognize that as well.
It was one of the worst betrayals of the cause of liberty by the socialists, this declaration of religion as a private matter. Mankind has slowly grown out of the fearful ignorance, superstition, bigotry, and intolerance which made religious persecution and inquisitions possible. The advance of science and invention, the printed word, and means of communication have brought about enlightenment, and it is that enlightenment which has, to some extent, freed the human mind from the clutches of the Church. Not that she has entirely ceased to damn those who do not accept her dogmas. There is still enough of that persecution. But the advance of knowledge has robbed the Church of her former absolute sway over the mind, the life, and liberty of man, just as progress has in the same way deprived government of the power to treat people as absolute slaves and serfs. You can easily
So
see
he actually
then
did
how important
mention
it is
that
to
same sort of
continue
thing.
the work
Take
of
away the freedom to
enlightenment,
make people
which has
slaves
proven
and
such a
serfs.
liberating blessing for the people in the past, to continue it so that it might some day help us do entirely away with the forces of superstition and tyranny. But the socialists were determined to give up this most necessary work, declaring religion to be a private matter.
Because I think they saw the practicality of doing so. If you're insulting, you know, 70 to, it was probably even higher in 100 years ago, probably closer to 90% of the population that you're trying to get to be on your side. If you're just throwing around insults and um, saying that you're not going to be able to practice your religion anymore, all these sorts of things, that's not a really good practical winning strategy for a mass movement. And hopefully any good leftist movement is a mass movement. It is for the benefit of the masses. So you hopefully want to get the masses on your side. And if you want the masses on your side, maybe don't go out of your way to insult them. That's all.
Those compromises and the repudiation of the real aims of socialism paid rather well. The socialists gained political strength at the sacrifice of ideals, but that strength has in the long run spelled weakness and ruin.
See, but really, is that what happened? Did they sacrifice their ideals in the name of being accommodating to religious factions, or was it for the reasons that he had stated earlier, to just realizing that they were structurally incapable of making the sort of change they want, and also falling prey to the corrupting influences of wielding power? I don't think it's a really strong connection that he's drawing between, compromising on religion and saying that it's for people to decide in their own homes, and giving up on your ideals. I'm not connecting those two dots right there.
There is nothing more corrupting than compromise. One step in that direction calls for another, makes it necessary and compelling,
Slippery slope.
and soon swamps you with the force of a rolling snowball, become a landslide.
Sometimes slippery slope happens.
One by one, those
A lot
features
of
of
times
socialism, which were really significant, educational, and liberating, were sacrificed in behalf of politics to secure more favorable public opinion, lessen persecution, and accomplish something practical.
See, but that's
That
a bit
is, to
different.
get more socialists elected into office. In this process, which has been going on for years in every country, the socialist parties in Europe acquired membership that numbered millions. But these millions were not socialistic at all. They were party followers who had no conception of the real spirit and meaning of socialism. Men and women steeped in old prejudices and capitalistic views, bourgeois-minded people, narrow nationalists, church members, believers in divine authority, and consequently also in human government, in the domination of man by man, in the state and its institutions of oppression.
Yeah, so again, he's drawing that conclusion that just by virtue of having a government, that means that it has to be man dominating man. I don't think that's true, especially if we're looking at a very localized version of government. You know, like I was talking about, just say you were to organize your neighborhood into a political body where, let's say, it was even representative to some extent. Perhaps each block elected a block captain who would vote on matters in your parallel government, and be assigned to committees in your parallel government, that sort of thing. But could also be then recalled at any point by a majority vote of your block. Is that still man dominating man at that point? If everyone is, and if we went even further, if we got to the point of having more of a direct democracy, even at the neighborhood level or the block level or whatever, if everyone is involved in government in a really big, meaningful, and impactful way, that if everyone wields governmental power, is that really still man dominating man? Is that still an inherently unjustly hierarchical system? I don't think so at that point. I don't think so at that point. If things are organized from the bottom up, if power, instead of being top down, flowing from the top down and moving out into the masses, comes from the bottom and is, generated upward, where there are checks on power from below, to those that are given the privilege of wielding power on higher levels. At that point, I don't think, I think that's about as unexploitative as we can get, while also still working together to solve problems of society, which, in my ideal situation, is what government is supposed to be for. For working out problems that naturally arise. And then also for justly and equitably distributing resources and resources, basically. So again, I can't get quite on board with what he's saying, that government is inherently man exploiting man. I can't quite get there with him.
And exploitation, and the necessary defending of their government and country, and patriotism and militarism. Is it any wonder, then, that when the Great War broke out, the socialists in every country, with few exceptions, took up arms to defend the fatherland of their rulers and masters? The German socialist fought for his autocratic Kaiser, the Austrian for his Habsburg monarchy, and the Russian for the Tsar, the Italian for his king, the Frenchman for the Republic. And so the socialists of every country and their followers went on slaughtering each other until tens of millions of them lay dead, and 20 millions were blinded, maimed, and crippled. It was inevitable that the policy of political parliamentary activity should lead to such results, for in truth, so-called political action is, so far as the cause of workers.
So I'm starting to develop, I don't even know, it wouldn't really even be a theory, it'd be more like a hypothesis, because I haven't studied revolutions all that great of a detail, from many different angles, many different sources, that sort of thing. I'm just starting to kind of organize these ideas into my head. But it seems to me that the Soviet Union being the first major socialist revolution that took place by violent overthrow of the government and trying to replace it with a worker state. Um, it seems like they went so fast that they left a lot of people behind in the process. A lot of people just weren't on board with the new program once it came into power. And that caused a lot of problems for them in the long run. Um, and then, I mean, there's so many reasons that the Soviet Union specifically had difficulties, largely from being the first as well, because it shocked the rest of the world so much that the Western capitalist powers felt super threatened by them from the start, to the point of trying to, you know, uh, launch their own counter revolution, basically. That all these different factors seem to me that that's why things ended up falling apart in the long run. Why it wasn't as permanent as they would have liked it to be, of course. Because then when you look at the subsequent revolutions that happened, one after another, until you have China, you have North Korea, you have Vietnam. Um, by the time you get to Cuba, it seems like they had learned a lot from that, from the ones that have gone before them. Because as far as I can tell, from everything that I've done research on, and research is not even a good word, everything that I've studied about Cuba, all the information I've been able to gather, it, perhaps more than any other country, has come closer to really, truly being able to call itself a socialist state. They have incredible buy-in from the people, by and large, overwhelming support for the form of government that they have. Massive election turnouts. They actually have open elections, free and open elections. They did land reform. They gave the peasantry, the former peasantry, I guess, and it wasn't really even the peasantry. The ones who were subjugated by the capitalists who were exploiting the sugar plantations, and the people that were exploited by the various casino operations that were in place. They managed to give the land back to a lot of those people. I don't know that everyone got their land back in the end, but a lot did. So there was that. They've managed to get a world-class healthcare system. To the point where the Western powers did not share the vaccine with them. They had to manufacture their own, and they did, and shared it with a whole bunch of the rest of the world. All while being under U.S. embargo from the onset, all while facing, hundreds of assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, having seemingly everything thrown against them. Like, by all accounts, you would think that being just off the coast of the United States, um, they would have been, you know, the U.S. would have just come in and thrown its weight around from the beginning. But they've managed to hang on somehow. So it seems to me that the further things go along, the more history there is of this sort of thing, and the more that the people in general, the average person, can come to expect what's going to happen, and then the more successful and long-lasting it appears to be, and the more complete it is toward, or the more, the more progress it gets towards instituting actual socialist state. So, yeah, Alexander Berkman didn't have a lot of respect for the Bolshevik Revolution, the one that put the Soviets in power. He lived in Soviet Russia in the beginning of it, and he thought it was a failed attempt. I don't know how long he lived. I don't know if he even lived to see the Cuban Revolution, but I kind of wonder what he would have thought about that if he would have had the same ideas that doing things that way meant that it was a going to be a failed attempt. And that, you know what? And we can even go beyond Cuba as well. It's hard to even frame movements like the Zapatistas and the Rojavans, um, the Syrian Kurdish movement as is hard. It's hard to even place it within the socialist spectrum of thought because they're in both cases coming from also different traditions uh, than a lot of these other ones. Although I guess yeah, Cuba is still part of Latin America, so that Mexico and the Zapatistas and Cuba, maybe not that different, but those have come along even more recently, and from all accounts that I've been able to gather about those, they've gone even further along. And a big reason that happened in both cases is because they actually did the thing that you're supposed to do in a socialist revolution. Once you've overthrown the old power, they gave up then power back to the people. At some point, they decided to give power back to the people directly. So it seems like I don't know if you want to call that a socialist revolution. In fact, in the case of Rojava, they were very much influenced by the anarchist Murray Bookchin. We're going to be looking at him in the not too distant future. After I finish this book, I'm going to do some short essays. So when we come back to the anarchist side of things, we'll do Murray Bookchin's one of Murray Bookchin's ones, the one that influenced the leader of the Rojavans. So yeah, so it's hard to really place them on the spectrum, but you know it seems like, and I'm not really sure what the cause is. If it's just that people have had time to look at other revolutions, learn from them, and then know better how to do it, or if it's that the populace themselves have had more examples to examine, so that more of the average people, the people that are not at the forefront of the revolution, are more likely to get on board with it because they know a lot more what to expect. I'm not quite sure what it is, but this was a long tangent, but basically these are just some of the ideas that I'm starting to formulate in my mind about the way that these revolutions tend to go, and why some of them end up not lasting, and why some of them seem to be getting much closer to the ideals that they set out from the beginning with. All right. Anyway, let's get back to the book.
And true progress is concerned, worse than inaction. The very essence of politics is corruption, sail trimming, the sacrifice of your ideals and integrity for success. Bitter are the fruits
Oh, sorry. I'll keep it
of
going.
that success for the masses and for every decent man and woman the world over. As a direct consequence of it, millions of workers in every country are discouraged and disheartened. Socialism, they feel, has deluded and betrayed them. 50, nay, almost 100 years of socialist work have resulted in the entire bankruptcy of socialist parties, in the disillusionment of the masses, and have brought about a reaction which now dominates the entire world and holds labor by the throat with an iron grip. Do you still think the socialist parties, with their elections and politics, can help the proletariat out of wage slavery?
No, I don't.
By their fruits you
That
shall
on
know
that,
them.
I believe Berkman is
But the
correct.
Bolsheviks, you protest. They did not betray the workers. They have socialism in Russia today. Let us take a look at Russia then.
Oh, and that's
This
the
has
end
been
of
a
the
production
chapter.
of Audible Anarchist. You can find more Audible Anarchist on YouTube.
We'll take a look and see how long the next chapter is before we move on. Before we decide whether or not we're going to move on, I should say.
This audio production was made in collaboration with Audible Anarchist.
15 minutes. Do you think we can do 15 minutes in half an hour? Okay. So we're going to look at Berkman's account of the February Revolution. It's usually called the October Revolution, so I'm not sure what he's going to refer to. Maybe something entirely different than what I was thinking of. I thought he was going to talk about the Bolshevik Revolution, which is usually called the October Revolution, to my knowledge. Let's see how far we get. Let's see how far we get. But I think I would like to start this one because this sounds intriguing.
Chapter 14. The February Revolution. In Russia, the Bolsheviki, known as the Communist Party, are in control of the government. The Revolution of October 1917 put them in power. That revolution was the most important event in the world since the French Revolution in 1789 through 1793.
I would agree with that.
It was even greater than the latter because it went much deeper to the rock bottom of society. The French Revolution sought to establish political freedom and equality, believing that it would thereby also secure brotherhood and welfare for all. It was a mighty step in advance on the road to progress, and it ultimately changed the entire political face of Europe. It abolished the monarchy in France, established a republic, and gave the death blow to feudalism, to the absolute rule of the church and the nobility. It influenced every country on the continent along progressive lines, and helped to further democratic sentiment throughout Europe. But fundamentally, it altered nothing. It was a political revolution to secure political rights and liberties. It did secure them. France is a democracy today, and the motto, liberty, brotherhood, equality, is written on every prison building. But it did not free man from exploitation and oppression.
I had to pause on that real quick. It's funny, the reader couldn't even contain themselves when they read that freedom, liberty, and equality is written on every prison building. That's funny.
And that is, after all, the thing that is needed most. The French Revolution put the middle classes, the bourgeoisie, into the government in place of the aristocracy and nobility. It gave certain constitutional rights to the farmer and worker.
Basically what happened in the U.S. as well. We had a bourgeois revolution in 1776, and it's pretty plain the way that the founders set up things, that they only wanted white landowning men to have any control over any of the affairs of government. So those were the only ones that could vote to begin with. And they put in the original version of the Constitution without the Bill of Rights. The reason they had the Bill of Rights is because they had to be put in separately after the fact. So, yeah, there's that's why we today have a bourgeois democracy at best. Because even though, in theory, all people have the right to vote, except, of course, certain criminals, we seem to think it's okay to take away their right to have a say over the laws that affect them. But so anyway, in theory, any free person can vote. Any free person can run for office. But we see the practical reality of that is not the case. That government functions to support capitalism and capitalists, and those are the ones that make up the ranks of the government by and large as well. So very similar to the way that happened in France as well. Just thought I'd point that out.
Worker, who until then were mere serfs. But the power of the bourgeoisie, its industrial mastery, made the farmer its abject dependent and turned the city worker into a wage slave. It could not be otherwise, because liberty is an empty sound, as long as you are kept in bondage economically. As I have pointed out before, freedom means that you have the right to do a certain thing, but if you have no opportunity to do it, that right is sheer mockery. The opportunity lies...
That's precisely what I'm talking about. Freedom is not just the freedom from legal blockers or legal barriers for you to do something. You also have to be, free from other barriers within your life in order to participate in whatever system we're talking about, in order to have whatever freedom that we're talking about. So that's a very good way of putting it. I like the way he said that. It's just like, and it's similar to the way that we all have the freedom to start our own business. We all have the freedom to form a cooperative. That doesn't mean we have the ability to. And if we don't have the ability to, that freedom is just an abstract concept with no real bearing on our reality.
lies in your economic condition, whatever the political situation may be. No political rights can be of the least use to the man who is compelled to slave all his life to keep himself and his family from starvation. Great as the French Revolution was as a step towards emancipation from the despotism of king and noble, it could accomplish nothing for the real freedom of man because it did not secure for him economic opportunity and independence. It is for that reason that the Russian Revolution was a far more significant event than all previous upheavals. It not only abolished the Tsar and his absolute sway, it did something more important. It destroyed the economic power of the possessing classes, of the land barons and industrial kings. For that reason, it is the greatest happening in all history, the first and only such time such a thing has been tried. This could not have been done by the French Revolution, because the people then still believed that political emancipation would be enough to make men free and equal. They did not realize that the basis of all liberty is economic. But that is by no means to the discredit of the French Revolution. The times were not ripe for a fundamental economic change.
I would take a small issue with that. The idea that all freedom is economic. I think that's there's a lot of truth to that, but I think more than that, all freedom is material. So if you have housing, food, transportation, utilities, healthcare, so on and so forth, the basics that you need for your life, that gives you a lot of freedom. That gives you freedom to not take jobs that you don't want. That gives you freedom to pursue interests that you might have. So I would just tweak that a little bit. Not that all freedom is fundamentally economic. It's all based on material security. I guess we could put it that way. If you have the material support, I guess would be a better way of putting it even. If you have the material supports in place, then no matter if you are even working a job, you still have a lot more freedom than someone who is working a job but is not making enough to secure all of those same material supports in their life, all the basic material supports that every human needs to be a full participant in society, and to have full control over their life. So I would tweak that just a little bit.
Change. Coming 128 years later, the Russian Revolution was more enlightened. It went to the root of the trouble. It knew that no political freedom would do any good unless the peasants got the soil and the workers got the factories in their possession, so that they should not remain at the mercy of the land monopolists and the capitalistic owners of the industries. Of course, the Russian Revolution did not accomplish this great work overnight. Revolutions, like everything else, grow. They begin small, accumulate strength, develop, and broaden. It was during the war that the Russian Revolution started. Because of the dissatisfaction of the people at home and the army on the front, the country was tired of fighting. It was worn out by hunger and misery. The soldiers had enough of slaughter. They began to ask why they must kill or be killed. And when soldiers begin asking questions, no war can continue much longer. The despotism and corruption of the Tsarist government added oil to the fire. The court had become a public scandal, with the priest Rasputin debauching the empress, and through his influence over her, and the Tsar controlling the affairs of the state. Intrigues, bribery, and every form of venality were rampant. The army funds were stolen by high officials, and soldiers were often forced to go into battle without enough ammunition and supplies. Their boots were paper-soled, and many had no footgear at all. Some regiments revolted, others refused to fight. More and more frequently, the soldiers fraternized with the enemy, young men like themselves, who had the misfortune of being born in a different country, and who, like the Russians, had been ordered to war without knowing why they must shoot or be shot. Great numbers dropped their guns and returned home. There they told the folks about the fearful conditions at the front, the useless carnage, the wretchedness, and disaster. That helped to increase the discontent of the masses, and presently voices began to be heard against the Tsar and his regime. Day by day this sentiment grew. It was fanned into flame by increased taxes and great want, by the shortage of food and provisions. In February 1917, the revolution broke out. As usual in such cases, the powers that be were stricken with blindness. The autocrat and his ministers, the aristocrats and their advisors, all believed that it was just a matter of some street disorders and strikes and bread riots. They imagined themselves safe in the saddle, but the disorder continued, spreading over the entire country, and presently the Tsar saw himself forced to quit the throne. Before long, the once mighty monarch was arrested and exiled to Siberia, where he himself had formerly sent thousands to their death, and where he and his whole family later met their doom. The Russian autocracy was abolished. The February Revolution against the most powerful government in Europe was accomplished almost without firing a gun. How could it have been done so easily, you wonder?
And this is all pretty unequivocally good stuff. You know, getting rid of monarchy is a good step, even if you're replacing it with, even in cases where it's being replaced by capitalism, it's a good step. Your average person has a lot more freedom and autonomy and choice in their life, in almost every circumstance. So yeah.
The Romanov regime was an absolutism. Russia under the Tsars was the most enslaved country in Europe. The people practically had no rights. The whim of the autocrat was supreme. The order of the police was the highest law. The masses lived in poverty and suffered the greatest oppression. They longed for freedom. For over 100 years, libertarians and revolutionists in Russia worked to undermine the regime of tyranny, to enlighten the people, and to rouse them to revolution against their subjugation. The history of that movement is replete with the consecration and devotion of the finest men and women. Thousands, even hundreds of thousands of them, lined the road of Golgotha, filling the prisons, tortured and done to death in the frozen wilds of Siberia. Beginning with the Decembrist attempt to secure a constitution over 100 years ago, all through the century the fires of liberty were kept burning by the heroic self-sacrifice of the nihilists and revolutionists. The story of that great martyrdom has no equals in the annals of man. Apparently, it was a losing struggle, for the complete denial of freedom made it practically impossible for the pioneers of liberty to reach the people, to enlighten the masses. Tsardom was well protected by its numerous police and secret service, as well as by the church, press, and school, which trained the people in abject servility to the Tsar and unquestioning obedience to law and order. Dire punishment was visited upon anyone daring to voice a liberal sentiment. The most severe laws punished even the attempt to teach peasants to read and write. The government and the nobility, the clergy, and the bourgeoisie all combined as usual to stamp out and crush the least effort to enlighten the masses. Deprived of even the means of spreading their ideas, the liberal elements in Russia were driven to the necessity of employing violence against the barbarous tyranny, of resorting to acts of terror in order by such means to mitigate, even to a small extent, the rule of despotism, and at the same time to compel the attention of their country and the world at large to the unbearable conditions. It was this tragic necessity that gave rise in Russia to terroristic activities, turning idealists, to whom human life was sacred, into executioners of tyrants. Nature's noblemen they were, these men and women, who willingly, even eagerly, gave their lives to lift the fearful yoke from the people. Like bright stars on the firmament of the age-long warfare between oppression and liberty, stand out the names of Sophie Perovskaya, Kibalchich, Grinovitsky, Sazonov, and countless other martyrs known and unknown of darkest Russia. It was a most uneven struggle, apparently a hopeless fight, for the revolutionists were but a handful against an almost limitless power of Tsardom, with its large armies, numerous police, special bureaus of political spies, its notorious Third Department, the secret Okhrana, its universal system of house janitors as police aides, and with all the great resources of a vast country of over 100 million population. A losing fight, and yet the splendid idealism of the Russian youth particularly, of the student element, their unquenchable enthusiasm and devotion to liberty were not in vain. The people came out the victor, as they ultimately always do in the struggle of light against darkness. What a lesson to the world! What encouragement
Always.
to the weakened
I think that's a
spirit!
bit optimistic.
What hope it holds for the further never-ceasing advancement of mankind in spite of all tyranny and persecution. In 1905 broke out the first revolution in Russia. Still strong was the autocracy, and the uprising of the masses was crushed, though not without its having compelled the Tsar to grant certain constitutional rights. But fearfully did the government avenge even those small concessions. Hundreds of revolutionists paid for them with their lives. Thousands were imprisoned, and many others doomed to Siberia. Again despotism drew a fresh breath, and felt itself secure against the people, but not for long. The hunger for liberty, may he be suppressed for a time, yet never exterminated. Man's natural instinct is for freedom, and no power on earth can succeed in crushing it for very long. 12 years later, a very short time in the life of a people, came another revolution, that of February 1917. It proved that the spirit of 1905 was not dead, that the price paid for it in human lives had not been in vain. Truly it has been said that the blood of the martyrs nourishes the tree of liberty. The work and self-sacrifice of the revolutionists had borne fruit. Russia had learned much from past experience, as succeeding events proved. The people had learned. In 1905 they had demanded only some mitigation of despotism, some small political liberties. Now they demanded the complete abolition of the tyrannical rule. The February Revolution sounded the death knell of Tsardom. It was the least bloody revolution in all history. As I have explained before, the power of even the strongest government evaporates like smoke the moment people refuse to acknowledge its authority, to bow to it, and withhold their support. The Romanov regime was conquered almost without a fight, naturally enough, since the entire people had become tired of its rule and had decided that it was harmful and unnecessary, and that the country would be better off without it. The ceaseless agitation and educational work carried out by the revolutionary elements, the socialists of various groups, including the anarchists, had taught the masses to understand that Tsardom must be done away with. So widespread had this sentiment become that even the army, the most unenlightened group in Russia, as in every land, had lost its faith in existing conditions. The people had outgrown the despotism, had freed themselves in mind and spirit from it, and thereby gained the strength and possibility of freeing themselves actually, physically. That is why the all-powerful autocrat could no more find support in Russia. No, not even a single regiment to protect him. The mightiest government in Europe had broke down like a house of cards. A temporary provisional government took the place of the Tsar. Russia was free.
Hey, and that's the
This
end of
has
that
been
one.
a
We made it
production of Audible
through
Anarchist. You can find
in plenty of time.
more
Okay.
Audible Anarchist on YouTube.
Fantastic resource, Audible Anarchist. Just reading Murray Bookchin today on Audible Anarchist. Got through a really great essay by his that I'll be looking up, or I'll be incorporating later on. Let me see if I can find the name of it. Alright, cannot find it there, but we'll keep looking. It was a really good book, or essay, I guess. I agreed with quite a bit of it. I'd say there's only a very small fraction that couldn't quite get behind, but I really like his writing style. I'm gonna have to look up more of his work because I was pretty impressed by it, and it was a lot more modern than any of the stuff we've covered so far. So it actually had a lot more modern context to it. Why am I not finding it here? Oh, here we go. We'll find it now. So it's called Post-Scarcity Anarchism by Murray Bookchin, and it was the text that was most influential to the guy who was the leader of, I guess it still is the leader of the Rojavan uprising in Syria, Rojavan movement. Yeah, so that'll be one we cover later on. Adds an ecological dimension to anarchism and its ideas. Still a little bit individualist for my taste. But yeah. All right, so we got through a couple chapters tonight. That last one was basically just a history, so I kind of wonder what I have not read ahead in this book at all, so I don't know what comes next. So let's see if we can go to the next one. See what the next title is going to be, what we'll cover next weekend. So he's just going through a little more history here. So the February Revolution, Russian Revolution, was the first major part of the revolution. It was the first segment of it where they overthrew the Tsar, they did away with the monarchy, no, not doing feudalism anymore. And that eventually led to the October Revolution, which is when the Bolsheviks took over and instituted the Soviet Union, So we're going to be doing between February and October next. Looks like it's just going to be another history lesson. Another short one. But that's fine. Whoops. Didn't mean to do that. And let's see how many more we got left. There's quite a few chapters in this book. Quite a few. So we were probably about halfway through. Let's see, we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold on. Messed up there. So, seventeen chapters left. So we're not even halfway. It's a longer book than I had anticipated, but overall I like it. But I feel like I'm only agreeing with about 50% of the stuff that Berkman's putting forward here. So that's a bit disappointing. But yeah, I guess it just is helping me understand more that I don't really agree with the individualist perspective or the individualist school of thought in anarchism all that much. It just does not jibe with the things that I think are important and the strategies of getting to a better society that I believe are important. So that's useful. It's just, I guess I just wish I agreed a little bit more with him about his stuff. But that's okay. Totally fine. I think that'll do it then for tonight. I'm probably going to do another episode of S.J. Witcher on Friday morning. And for those of you who have seen, or for those of you who have not seen as well, it's just been my fun little side project where I stream The Witcher 3 and we make decisions based on trying to be as just of a person as possible in an incredibly cruel and unjust world, which is the world of The Witcher 3, which is a world of monarchism and cheapness of life and all that stuff. Hey Natalie, how you doing? Um so Berkman seems to be very individualist in his conception of what anarchy is. It's mostly about his personal beliefs and his personal strategy for navigating the world. And I guess I'm just more of a collectivist when it comes to anarchism. I believe that we do best when we work together. Hi Natalie, good to have you. Um, I think that some amount of government is inevitable, and I think that's okay. So that was another big disagreement I have. He just basically wants to throw out government entirely. He thinks that people can just individually manage their lives, and that's good enough. And I don't agree with that. Um, I think some amount of government is just inevitable. That government at its best is a tool to allocate resources fairly, and to reallocate resources fairly, and to solve disagreements with justice, and impartiality. Um, so so I think some level of government is okay and even good. I gave the example of my preferred strategy of just like organizing your own neighborhood, saying the government has failed us in providing the basics for our lives. Uh, let's look towards each other to rely on. Let's set up instruments or institutions of mutual aid where everyone, just by living in that neighborhood, has a say in how things are organized, how things are allocated. Um, Perhaps do things where every block elects a block captain and then they represent the interest of your block to the neighborhood council. And that council is basically just a network of various types of mutual aid organized around the basic needs of people. So you'd have an education committee, you'd have a food committee, you'd have a housing committee, things like that. And then your representative would, be assigned, or there's different ways you could do it. You could either have them just be assigned to a committee, or they could run for particular committees and be voted in by the neighborhood. There's many ways to do it, but one way or another, your representative gets to be on at least one committee, and then there would be subcommittees within each one. So in your education committee, you might have a subcommittee that helps just tutor students. So people that are good in a subject, all meet in someone's house even, or a community center or something, and you just help tutor students. You might have another subcommittee that actually puts on classes, things like that. But all of this is setting up a government apparatus to address these problems. I'm wrapping up. Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. So I disagreed with him there. Yeah, there's Amanda for everybody.
I'm tired.
Yeah. So we're heading to bed soon. Anyway, I had a bunch of different disagreements with him, and it usually came down to whether or not government was useful at all. We also disagreed about religion. I'm not as harsh on religion as he is. And I think it's a bad organizing strategy to alienate something that 70%. Oh, Natalie says hi, Amanda.
Hey, Natalie.
I think it's a bad organizing strategy to potentially alienate 70% of the people that you're trying to work with, because 70% of people in the U.S., that's what I use for the example, believe in some religion, and of that group, most of them is going to be Christians. So you can go out of your way to try and alienate them and stand on your principles, or you can recognize that people are going to believe what they want to believe, and as long as it's not really crossing the threshold of oppressing people with that belief, what do you really care what people think? So we disagreed there, and I did not like his stance on that. So those are the disagreements so far. But overall, agree with his assessment that, say, reform socialism has not worked. And yeah, I agreed with a lot of his diagnoses of what the problems are. I just don't tend to agree with his prescription of how to change things. And that's been that. All right, let's raid into someone else now. We'll see who's on.
Noah.
No, it doesn't really stream too often.
My channel.
Yeah, your channel's not live, is it?
Nope.
Let's
Nobody
do. Let's do Rev Black Network. They're talking about Sam Cedar tonight. Sam Cedar destroyed by Jackson Hinkle in debate. Ooh. Oh. Well, maybe we're not going to do that one, because I don't think Jackson Hinkle is a good actor. So we'll do something different.
Well, while Zach is finding something for y'all to go right into,
Mm.
just want to put a feeler out there if anybody wants me to hop on and do a plant spot.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
During,
That'd be a lot of fun. You come on and
during
talk
Red
about
Theory.
plants and stuff. Maybe we'll do.
Just like 5 minutes. I used to have a plant channel, but the only person that watches is my mother-in-law.
Yeah, and she really liked it.
Yeah, but that's not enough.
Well, because you didn't, you did more like they would be good in a YouTube video format. Um, Boy, everyone's talking about Sam Cedar versus Jackson Hinkle. I'm not really feeling that one.
Who's Jackson Hinkle?
He often gets uh the the label of tanky.
I thought you were supposed to say that word.
I don't call people that in general, but that's what people usually call. But he seems to be one of those people that has a lot of problems with everyone on the left that doesn't specifically believe the exact same things that he does. Um, I believe that's it. But it looks like we're not going to avoid that, so we'll do Good Morning Comrade. We'll see. We'll at least see what they have to say about it. So if you're looking for another Twitch streamer to follow, there's Good Morning Comrade. I'll put up that Patreon link one more time. Oops. Have a good night to you as well, or have a good night as well, Natalie. And then here's my link to follow me in all the places. So follow that link tree there, and you can find me in all the different social medias and platforms and whatnot. But we will raid into Good Morning Comrade. In the past, I've liked their content, so we'll see how it goes. Yeah. All right. Let's get the raid going, and hope to see you all Friday morning.
Bye, guys. Stay healthy.
Yeah.
Get your booster if you haven't.
Yeah, I just got mine last weekend, and it wasn't that bad. I had less symptoms than even with my second dose.
I would also agree to that. That my round 2 was not as bad as.
Yeah.
Or round 3 was not as bad as 2.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad I have it now because those cases are just insane every day. The number of people.
35,000, 40,000, everything's fine.
Tens of thousands of people in our state every day. It's ridiculous. Let's go. All right, see you guys next time.
Bye.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and do all those things.
And share what kind of plants you want me to come out and talk about.
Okay, yes, do that too.
I have a sick cactus collection.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I have to start the raid again. That didn't work. Good morning, comrade. Okay, not letting me raid Good Morning Comrade. Perhaps they only allow people that they follow to raid, so we'll just find someone else.
Political pain.
He's not on too much anymore, unfortunately. When he does, it's usually Friday too. He started up a little bit more. He's been having J. Andrew World, who's a really great illustrator, and Ben Burgess and those sorts of people on lately.
Oh.
Oh boy, it's hard to find people that are on right now. We'll just do feminist critique. I always like them. So there you go, feminist critique. We'll try rating them. Oh, you know what? I bet I didn't refresh this one. I bet that's the problem. I had the old stream up still. So we'll try No, we'll do feminist critique instead. Hopefully this will work. There we go. That one finally worked. All right. See y'all Friday, hopefully. And if not, hopefully see you Sunday.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.